Good morning. It's Sunday, August 2nd, 2026. My name is Terry Morgan, and we're here to talk about martial arts philosophy and all sorts of things that are connected to practice, study, and development of our skills in the martial arts. One of the things that is I've talked about before, and I'm going to talk about it again this morning, is perspective. And this idea that we come to whatever we practice with whatever perspective we have. It's human. It's how we get started. And as we develop our skills, that perspective changes. We begin to pay attention to things that we might not have otherwise paid attention to. We begin to see things in a different way, and we begin to develop a sense of perspective, but also a sense of, I'm looking for the word here, what we keep in our heart, the way that we perceive others, the way that we perceive the outside world, the way that we perceive ourselves is all part of what we pay attention to in practice. So if I'm practicing, let's say I'm practicing Qigong, I want to pay attention to my breathing, especially. I want to pay attention to the internal connections. I want to pay attention to how I connect the movement and the breath. And there's a whole other list of things that I do want to pay attention to. If I'm paying attention to push hands in Tai Chi, I need to pay attention to my opponent. Now, there's push hands is two people generally. There are other opportunities, but generally it's two people. And I need to pay attention to what's going on outside as well as inside. That perspective, that way of looking at things changes depending on practice, depending on how much we've learned about any particular thing. My perspective on, I use food a lot. My perspective on Chinese food is different than probably the average American because I've been over there and I've lived there and I have a great appreciation for the flavors and varieties of authentic Chinese food. I do. I also particularly enjoy several kinds of Japanese noodles. Hard to get here, easy to find in Japan. Those kinds of things give me a different perspective on certain foods. I could use Italian noodles and fresh pasta is completely different than the stuff that we buy in the box. It's not the same, not even close. That perspective, when I look at someone who's practicing Tai Chi or I look at someone who's practicing a martial art of any kind or some art that I know, I'm going to apply that perspective. If I don't know anything about it, it's hard to apply any certain things I can, but generally, no. There are points of balance. There are points of use of force, basic physical geometry, basic physics that I can look at and I say, well, that person understands what they're doing. I'm not sure I do, but that person does. So, okay. There might be some questions. There might be some questions later about what was really going on. What did I see? I might think about I think about things. I might think about it later, and well, I'm not sure. Or I might think about it later and say, aha, that's what it was. That um, reflection informs my perspective. That is one of the keys to learning and developing. As we grow, we learn, we take in that information, and it changes our perspective on whatever it is we're looking at. I had the good fortune to teach an in-person class yesterday, and I was explaining a little bit the concept of push hands, that within the movement of cloud hands in Tai Chi, we have 4 of the core applications: Peng, Lu, Ji, An, and that the distinction between Peng, ward off, and Ji, press, is small in terms of what we can see in the movement. It's very difficult to see the difference between Peng and Ji in movement. You can see the difference between Liu, pull down, and ward off very easily. Peng, Ji, it's really hard to see. The opportunity to put my hand on someone else's arm and show them is what I had yesterday. And that was great because, and this is what I was getting to with the perspective, because there was that instant recognition through touch of this is this thing and this is this other thing. And now all of the people in the room I went to each person. Now all of the people who were in that room understand the distinction. Their perspective has changed. That concept in being able to show someone with a very small example, very simple example, what it is we're talking about, and use a sense that we don't always think about so much, touch, changes the perspective on the meaning of the word, as well as the concept, with the idea that this is one thing and this is another. We use those small changes. We use that small adjustment. Is this press? Is this push? I can press with my palm just as I can push with my palm. What's the dynamic in the movement? What am I actually doing? And knowing what that is, knowing what that actual movement is, not the outward movement, what's going on inside, knowing what that is, makes all the difference for Tai Chi practice, for Qigong practice, Bagua, Xingyi, all of the internal arts. And it doesn't hurt for the external arts as well. Paying attention to what we're doing, how we perceive it. Because if I just show the movement and I don't give you the connection so that you can understand what is going on behind it, you're not going to know. And your perspective will be one of only seeing the physical outward movement, not understanding what's going on behind it. That perspective is what I spent a bit of time on yesterday in trying to talk about my own background so that if you're listening to me now and you're looking at the wall behind me, you see the four seasons. You see three of the four seasons. My head's in one of them. There it is. You see some trophies, you see some certificates, you see some furniture, a couple of plants. That gives you a perspective on who I am, my background, my experience, things that I might be able to provide some information about, some things that I might be able to put into perspective because of what I've seen, what I've experienced. That background, literal background right behind me. If you see that, there's a chance that you perceive that, well, I might know something. There's a chance. When I was thinking about how to present what I was preparing yesterday, I had to think about that perspective. If I just stand up and say, well, this and this and that, and this is the way this is, and this is the way that is, does it help you? Or you just look at me and say, well, yeah, hey, she's talking. You can. And this is actually something I would encourage people to kind of pay attention to generally. I talked about my own studies and my background in Tai Chi, Qigong, Bagua, Xingyi, all of the internal Chinese martial arts that I have practiced and studied for about 40 years now. And I talked about and I showed some pictures of things that I have done, some seminars I attended, some classes I attended, workshops, some books that I've written, a few things. I didn't go overboard. What I wanted to do was to show that I studied. I was working at this for a while. And that's the perspective that I have, is that I've studied and I've worked at this for a while and I've learned a few things in the process. If I had just started out, let's say I've only been practicing for 1 year. 1 year. And I studied, I worked at it, I read a lot of books, I went to class a couple times a week. My perspective would not be the same. And if you were looking for someone who could teach you, not just lead a practice group, someone who could teach, the person who has worked at it for a year might be someone that you like. You might want to learn from them. Possible. The perspective that they have on learning, the perspective that they have on teaching would be different than mine. It's just the way it is. So the question then becomes not so much what the differences are, but the choice of teacher and the expectations. Maybe the person who's been studying for 1 year has a background in another sport, and they have a lot of energy. They're up and moving around, and they want to do all sorts of things through what they're doing with their movements. They want to work on the slow form, they want fast form, they want this, they want that. They're going to do all sorts of things. They're very energetic. They want to go. If you want to go with them, that could be a good person to study with. It could. It's not a bad thing. But knowing that's what you're doing is my point. If you know in advance, if you have that perspective to say, let me ask, what am I going to learn? What are my opportunities? The person who's been learning for a year is very likely, and they're very enthusiastic about it, they're very likely going to keep learning. They're going to keep going. They're not going to stop with, well, I've learned this one thing and now I'm going to, now I'm just going to teach this one thing. They're going to keep learning. They're going to keep going. And it might be a fun ride. It could be. On the other side, the person who studied for a longer time, if you're looking for a guide to say, you know, this is a good way to go, and this is a good way to go, don't go over here, this is not so good. That might be a better person to talk with, because they already know some of the mistakes that the person who's only studied for a year is going to make. They will. I did. That's it. It's natural. That's what happens. The perspective that that person has will change over time. There will be adjustments based on learning. There will be adjustments based on feedback. There will be all sorts of things that will change over time. That should happen. If a person starts out studying with that young student, they're going to go exploring. They're going to find all sorts of things that could be enlightening and will help with that perspective and may even change the way that they view the person they're studying with. That can all change. The person with more experience, the person who's been at it for a while, and I don't say that necessarily with the idea that only someone who's older can have studied for a while. My teacher, Professor Liu Zhang, started studying when he was about 6 years old with his father and his father's friend. His grandfather taught him. And he continued learning throughout his entire life. So by the time he was 36, he'd been studying for 30 years. He was still a young man at that time. 36 is not old. So that perspective, how long has this person been studying? What have they practiced? What did they learn? Understanding the background, understanding what you may learn, because the person can't really teach something that they don't know, right? So understanding what you may learn, understanding what you might gain, is part of the decision that I would encourage anybody that wants to study anything to make. If that evaluation holds true for anyone presenting anything. Who is this person? And it's not the let's go point fingers kind of question. This is more of a qualification. Who is this person? What's their background? And how are they qualified to speak on this topic? I studied Tai Chi and Bagua and Xing Yi and other martial arts for 40 years. I spent some time in China. I practice daily. I've worked at it for a long time. That's my qualification. it's not a bad qualification, actually, that practice and study is something that I value in myself as well as in people that I want to study with. So I looked at what the person's qualifications are. Who are you, Professor Liu? When I first met him, who are you? Who's this guy? He was leading Xingyi practice. I thought that was pretty interesting. I hadn't seen a lot of group Xingyi practice. As we got to talking, and at that point it was through an interpreter, we discovered that I discovered that he had a pretty extensive background, and he discovered that I was very interested in learning Tai Chi. It worked out. There was a part of perspective when he was looking at me as a prospective student. What's his perspective? Why is he going to consider me? What's his view of the world? And what are the basic expectations? What am I supposed to do? What am I expected to do? I had to look at the same kinds of things. Yes, I want to learn, and geez, this looks like fun, but it's going to be difficult, I think. And let me try that perspective. Let me try. It looks like fun. Let me go. I could have, oh no, that's too hard. I can't do that. No, right? I didn't have that perspective. I had the let me go find out perspective. And that's part of why I said, even someone who's studied for a year, they may not have learned that much yet, but depending on their perspective, depending on what they want to do, depending on their drive and where they're going with what they want, it might not be bad. It might not be bad. As we pay attention to our own perspective and the way that we see things, the way that we perceive the outside world, we also change the way that we perceive ourselves. The way that others see me changes the way I see myself. I tend to I pay attention to all kinds of things. I don't necessarily adjust for each and every person, but I do pay attention to how I present myself and how I'm perceived by others. That perception makes a difference. So if I come to class, I'm going to teach martial arts. I'm going to teach Tai Chi. And I come to class wearing the traditional frog button jacket that a lot of people wear. I have a couple of them in my closet that I wear for competition. Nice silks. I do. I wear them for competition. I don't wear them in class. Never have. Why? Why would I wear my silks for practice? Dress up clothes. Why would I wear a formal gown to go run around in the yard? I wouldn't. I wouldn't. My perspective on when it's appropriate to wear formal clothes makes a difference in what I wear. The perspective that you have of me, because I'm not wearing formal clothes, is different than it is with just a t-shirt, plain, nothing special about it. That perspective. There's nothing special right? Except that what's behind me, literally, and in my own background, make a difference in my credibility, in being able to speak to the subjects that I know something about. One or two. I don't know a lot about a lot of things, but I know a little about all sorts of things. And I know more than a little about a few things. Very few, but a few. The perspective that gives me, that understanding that, well, no, I don't know everything. It's not possible for any one human to know everything, so I'm not going to claim that I know everything. And I most certainly don't know everything about any of the subjects that I'm good at. I don't. There are lots of people who know things that I don't know, and there are lots of people who don't know things that I do know. Being critical, critically thinking, being critical is not the same as thinking critically. I can criticize them. Oh, well, no, her hair is just wrong, and this is just wrong, and that's off balance, and this is not, and no, I can pick at things all day long. It's not useful, it's not helpful, and it's destructive. That perspective, that it's destructive, is one of the things that helps me to think critically without being critical. So I can notice that maybe my lighting is off today. Okay, it could be better. It's been worse. It could be better. I could notice that I tend to lean to one side or the other, depending on what I'm talking about. I do. I can notice all sorts of things. And I can pay attention to them without being point your finger critical. You need to correct this. Okay, that's the wrong way, isn't it? I go this way. That's better, right? That adjustment in my posture gives me a different perspective. No, I'm not leaning this way. No, I'm not leaning this way. I'm trying to sit in the middle. So I'm straight, nicely balanced, that my posture is comfortable and well aligned. So that when you look at what I'm doing, if you listen to what I'm doing and are watching what I'm doing, you don't feel like you need to do this. Right? In all sorts of creative work, we look to change the person's perspective. We want to change the observer's perspective. That's part of creative work. Let me help you change your perspective. Let me help you see things in a different way. That concept is something that is part of all of the internal arts, all of the internal martial arts. It's also something that is part of all of the external martial arts. As we move, as we look at objects, creatures in the natural world, a lot of our movements come from natural creatures. The movement of a cat. In Tai Chi, we have the idea that the waist turns like a wheel, a real world object that we use to mirror what we should be doing in the movement. Moving like a cat, nimble, light, body is well placed, has the ability to jump without preparation. Pretty much cats just go there. That idea of prompt and sudden movement. If a cat is going to grab something, it waits for the right time and then it goes. That perspective, move like a cat, turn like a wheel, is something that we use in Tai Chi to guide how we move. When we pay attention to these things, pay attention to the perspective that we have, we pay attention to the knowledge that we have, we pay attention to what we know and what we don't know, so that as we practice, we develop a greater sense of perspective around what we're practicing and how we're practicing, so that we can continue to develop. It takes practice, it takes time, and it takes the idea that the perspective that there's always something more to learn. That perspective, there's always something more to learn, will carry us for years and years and years through all of the types of practice that we might do. There's always going to be something more to learn. I thank you for being here today. I will be back next week with sets 11 for Wudang Qigong and philosophy class on Sunday. I'm not sure right now what I'm going to talk about, but I will have something for you next week. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Bye.